The wine glass slipped from my fingers and shattered against the marble floor. That's what I remember most about that moment. Not her words, not the 100 wedding guests turning to stare, but the sound of crystal breaking into 1,000 pieces. Like my relationship with my son. My name is Nadine Brewster, and until 3 months ago, I thought I'd be dancing at my son's wedding. Instead, I stood frozen in the middle of their engagement party while my future daughter-in-law, Veronica, announced to everyone that the greatest wedding gift I could give them was to disappear from their lives forever. The silence that followed was suffocating. You know how they say you can hear a pin drop? I heard my own heartbeat. I heard someone's ice cube shift in their drink. I heard my sister Margaret gasp from somewhere behind me. But mostly, I heard the absence of my son Marcus defending me. He just stood there, his arm around Veronica's waist, looking at the floor. I should have seen it coming. The signs were all there, laid out like breadcrumbs leading to this public execution. The way Veronica's smile never reached her eyes when I hugged her. How she'd suddenly remember urgent errands whenever I visited. The canceled Sunday dinners, one after another, always with perfectly reasonable excuses. Marcus got quieter during our phone calls, rushing to hang up whenever she walked into the room. But I was a fool. I kept telling myself she was just shy, just needed time to warm up. I bent over backwards trying to make her comfortable. I learned to cook her grandmother's Polish recipes. I defended her when my friends said she seemed cold. I even sold my mother's engagement ring, the one that should have gone to Marcus for his bride, when Veronica mentioned she'd always dreamed of a specific Tiffany setting. The room at the Fairmont Hotel was beautiful that night. Veronica had insisted on hosting the party there, even though I'd offered her home. Soft golden lighting, white orchids on every table, a string quartet playing in the corner. She'd invited all her attorney friends from the firm, her entire extended family from Chicago, and what I now realize was a carefully curated selection of my friends and family, the ones who didn't know our history well enough to defend me. She's been trying to control our entire relationship from day one, Veronica said, her voice cutting through the silence. She wasn't even looking at me. She was addressing the room like this was her closing argument in court. That should have been my first red flag about her. She was a litigation attorney who treated every conversation like a cross-examination. She went on. She told them about the time I'd suggested they wait a year before moving in together, painted it as me trying to break them up. She told them I'd tried to sabotage her career by calling her managing partner. I'd actually called to arrange a surprise celebration for her promotion. Every kind gesture I'd made over the past 2 years, she twisted into something sinister. And the room started nodding along. These people who'd known me for decades, who'd eaten at my table, who'd cried with me when Marcus's father died, they were looking at me like I was some kind of monster. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't pick up my purse. The shattered glass crunched under my heels as I turned to leave. Marcus finally looked up then, and for just a second, I saw my little boy in his eyes, the one who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms. But then Veronica touched his arm, and he looked away. The last thing I heard as the elevator doors closed was applause. They were actually applauding. That was 3 months ago. Last week, I destroyed her life. And I'm not sorry. The morning after the engagement party, I woke up in my workshop. I must have driven there on autopilot because I don't remember leaving the hotel. My hands were stained purple from the elderberries I'd been pressing for next month's farmer's market. Funny how muscle memory works when your mind shuts down. I'm 62 years old, and I've been making artisanal preserves and jellies for the past 15 years. I started it as therapy after my husband Daniel died of pancreatic cancer. What began in my kitchen turned into Brewster's Preserves, a small business that supplies 17 restaurants across Seattle and has a waiting list every summer for my wild blackberry lavender jam. It's not about the money. Daniel left me well provided for. It's about creating something beautiful with my hands, something that brings people joy. The workshop is in an old converted barn 20 minutes outside the city. I'd bought the property with Daniel when Marcus was 10, thinking we'd fix it up together as a family project. After Daniel died, Marcus helped me convert it into my commercial kitchen. He installed every shelf, helped me choose the industrial refrigerators, even designed the label that goes on every jar. Or at least, he did before Veronica came along. I tried going through the motions that morning. Sterilizing jars, checking the temperature on the batch of apricot vanilla I'd started the day before. But my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I kept seeing the faces at that party, friends who'd known me for 30 years, looking at me like I was some toxic stranger. My own son, choosing her lies over our entire history. The door chimed and Helen walked in. She's been my assistant for 3 years, a retired nurse who needed something to do after her husband passed. She took one look at me and put the coffee down. I told her everything. The words just poured out while we labeled 300 jars of strawberry basil. She listened, occasionally making that humming sound that meant she was thinking. When I finished, she said something that would echo in my head for weeks. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is served in small jars. I didn't know what she meant then. I was too raw, too humiliated. I went home to my empty house in Madison Park, the same house where Marcus took his first steps, where we'd hosted 26 Thanksgivings, where Daniel took his last breath holding my hand. The silence was unbearable. Even my cat, Machi, seemed to sense something was wrong, following me from room to room. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went through our family photo albums. Every picture told a story Veronica had tried to erase. Marcus at 7, covered in flour after we'd made cookies for his class. Marcus at 15, hugging me after his father's funeral. Marcus at 25, the day he graduated from law school, telling everyone his mom was his hero for holding the family together. What happened to that boy? How did 2 years with Veronica turn him into someone who could stand silent while she eviscerated me in public? By the way, if you're still listening to this story, hit that subscribe button. I promise you, what comes next will make you believe in karma. And drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. I'm curious if betrayal feels the same in every city. The first time I met Veronica should have told me everything. Marcus brought her to Sunday dinner about 2 years ago. She walked into my home wearing a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than most people's mortgage payments, looked around my living room with its family photos and comfortable furniture, and asked if I'd ever considered updating my decor. Not hello. Not nice to meet you. Just immediate judgment wrapped in a smile that looked practiced in a mirror. Marcus laughed nervously and said Veronica had an eye for design. I served my grandmother's pot roast recipe, the one Marcus had requested every birthday since he was 12. Veronica pushed it around her plate, mentioning she was mostly plant-based, but would make an exception this once. She didn't touch it. Later, I overheard her telling Marcus that my cooking was exactly what she'd expected from someone of my generation. The small cruelties started almost immediately. She'd schedule couples activities during our standing Sunday dinners, then act surprised when Marcus mentioned it. Sorry, Nadine, I completely forgot about your little tradition. She had a way of emphasizing certain words, little, quaint, simple, that made everything about my life sound inferior. When I threw Marcus a surprise party for his 30th birthday, she spent the entire evening telling guests how she would have done it differently. The barbecue I'd carefully planned in our backyard became provincial. The cake I'd made from scratch was sweet, but had I considered myself a professional baker? Even my gift, a restored first edition of his favorite childhood book, was overshadowed by her gift of a Rolex, presented in front of everyone with a speech about how a successful man needs to look the part. But the moment that really should have warned me happened 6 months before the engagement party. I'd invited them to join me at the farmer's market where I sell my preserves. It was the Harvest Festival, my biggest sale day of the year. Marcus used to help me every year, charming customers while I handled the cash box. Veronica showed up an hour late, wearing white designer jeans to an outdoor market in October. She stood behind my booth like she was being held hostage, occasionally checking her phone with dramatic sighs. When a regular customer complimented my apple butter, saying it was the best in Seattle, Veronica laughed. "Oh, that's so sweet," she said. "You should try Williams-Sonoma, though. They have this imported one from France that's absolutely divine." The customer looked confused, bought 1 jar instead of her usual 5, and walked away. Veronica did that 4 more times that day, each comment perfectly timed to undermine a sale. By the end of the day, I'd made half my usual revenue. Marcus didn't notice. He was too busy taking Instagram photos of Veronica posing with pumpkins. That night, I mentioned it to my sister Margaret. She said I was being too sensitive, that Veronica was just sophisticated, from a different world. Chicago lawyers aren't like Seattle preserve makers, she said. Give her time. So I did. I gave her time when she forgot my birthday but remembered to post photos from their trip to Cabo that same weekend. I gave her time when she accidentally scheduled their housewarming party the same day as my preserves workshop I'd been planning for months. I gave her time when she told Marcus I seemed lonely and maybe should consider dating again, as if Daniel's memory was something to be discarded like old furniture. I even gave her time when she started the wedding planning and somehow forgot to include me in any of it. The mother of the groom, traditionally involved in at least some decisions, found out about venues, dates, and details through Marcus, always after the fact. When I offered to make jam favors for the guests, something personal and meaningful, she said wedding favors were outdated and wasteful. Every slight was small enough to seem petty if I complained. But together, they were on a campaign. I see that now. She was systematically erasing me from Marcus's life, replacing every tradition, every connection, every shared moment with something newer, shinier, more sophisticated. The engagement party invitation arrived 6 weeks before the event. Thick cream cardstock with gold embossing, Veronica's family crest at the top. Yes, apparently the Ashfords of Chicago have a family crest. My name was spelled wrong. Nadine had become Maydeen. When I called Marcus about it, he said it was probably just a typo from the printer, but I could hear Veronica in the background saying it didn't matter since everyone knew who I was anyway. The party was scheduled for October 15th, a date that hit me like a punch to the gut. It was Daniel's birthday. When I mentioned this to Marcus, he went quiet, then said Veronica had already put down the deposit and the date couldn't be changed. He'd forgotten. My son had forgotten his father's birthday. I spent the next 6 weeks trying to convince myself it would be fine. I bought a new dress, navy blue, conservative, nothing that could be criticized as trying too hard or not trying enough. I practiced conversations in my mirror, neutral topics that couldn't be twisted. I even prepared a gift, a photo album of Marcus from birth to college, something Veronica couldn't dismiss as unsophisticated. The Fairmont Hotel ballroom was transformed into Veronica's idea of elegance. Everything was white and gold, orchids flown in from Thailand, a champagne tower, a string quartet playing classical pieces I recognized from Marcus's childhood piano recitals, music he'd played for me, now soundtrack to her party. I arrived early, hoping to have a moment with Marcus before the crowd arrived. But Veronica had arranged for me to be seated at table 7, not the family table, not even close to the head table. Table 7 was in the back corner with Marcus's father's elderly aunt from Portland, my divorced cousin Sharon, who everyone knew drank too much, and 3 of Veronica's distant relatives who spoke only Polish. As guests arrived, I watched Veronica work the room. She was magnificent in her manipulation, I'll give her that. She'd introduce her parents to everyone with elaborate stories about their accomplishments. Her father the federal judge, her mother the charity board member. When someone asked about Marcus's family, she'd wave vaguely toward the back and say something about how I was probably somewhere around, busy with my little jam business. The speeches started after dinner. Veronica's father spoke about legacy and breeding, about how the Ashfords had been lawyers and judges for 4 generations. Her mother spoke about raising a daughter with standards, with expectations of excellence. Veronica's brother made jokes about Marcus being lucky to marry up, how he'd better not embarrass the family name. Then Veronica stood up. She started sweetly, talking about meeting Marcus, how he was different from the usual lawyers at her firm. Raw potential, she called him. Someone she could shape into something special. The room chuckled at what they thought was romantic banter. But I heard it for what it was. She saw my son as a project, something to be improved. Then she started talking about challenges in their relationship. Outside influences. People who didn't understand their vision for the future. People stuck in the past, clinging to outdated traditions and small-town values. She never said my name, but everyone started glancing at me. Marcus and I have worked so hard to build our life together, she said, her voice carrying perfectly through the room. "We've had to make difficult decisions about who belongs in our future and who doesn't." She paused, took a sip of champagne. "Some people refuse to let their children grow up, refuse to accept that their role in their child's life naturally diminishes. It's sad, really. Toxic, but sad." The room was silent. 100 faces turned to look at me. I sat there, frozen, my hands gripping the cloth napkin in my lap, so tight my knuckles went white. Veronica continued for another 5 minutes, every word a carefully placed dagger. She talked about mothers who couldn't let go, who tried to sabotage their sons' relationships, who were threatened by younger, more successful women. "The greatest gift anyone could give us for our wedding," she concluded, looking directly at me, "would be recognizing when it's time to step back. To disappear gracefully. To let Marcus finally be free." That's when I dropped the wine glass. The shatter was so loud in the silent room it sounded like an explosion. Red wine spread across the white tablecloth like blood. I stood up, my legs shaking. Marcus was staring at the floor, his face red. Not with anger at her. With embarrassment at me. I walked out. Slowly. Deliberately. Past every table of people I'd known for years, who were looking at me with mixtures of pity and disgust. Veronica had won. In front of everyone who mattered in both our lives, she'd painted me as the toxic mother-in-law, the barrier to their happiness. And Marcus had let her. The 3 days after the party were the darkest of my life, darker even than when Daniel died. At least then I had Marcus to hold on to, a reason to get up, someone who needed me. Now I had nothing but the echo of Veronica's words and the image of my son's downcast eyes, refusing to defend me. I didn't leave my bedroom. Helen came by twice, leaving food outside my door like I was some kind of wounded animal. Margaret called 17 times before I finally texted her that I was alive and needed space. Even Machi seemed afraid to comfort me, sitting just outside the doorway, watching. On the 3rd night, I couldn't sleep. I wandered into Daniel's old office. I'd kept it exactly as he left it, his reading glasses still on the desk, his last crossword puzzle half finished. We'd had our biggest fight in this room, 2 months before his diagnosis. He'd wanted to confront Marcus's high school girlfriend about cheating on him. I'd said no, that Marcus needed to learn to fight his own battles, to recognize manipulation on his own. Daniel had looked at me with such frustration. "Sometimes," Nadine said, "when someone you love is being hurt and can't see it, you have to fight for them. Even if they hate you for it at first." I'd won that argument. We didn't confront the girlfriend. Marcus found out about the cheating 3 months later, after she'd spent his entire college savings on concert tickets and clothes, claiming he'd given her permission. He was devastated, not just by the betrayal, but by the financial loss. It took him an extra year to save up for college again. Sitting in Daniel's chair at 3 in the morning, I finally understood what he'd meant. Sometimes love means being willing to be seen as the villain if it saves someone you love from a bigger pain. But how could I save Marcus when he'd already chosen her? When he'd stood by as she publicly humiliated me? The next morning, Helen found me in the workshop. I'd gone there at dawn, needing to do something with my hands. She worked beside me in silence for an hour before speaking. "You know what I learned as a nurse?" she said. "The most dangerous infections are the ones that look beautiful on the surface. Smooth skin, no obvious symptoms, everything appearing perfect. But underneath, there's rot. And if you don't cut it out, it spreads until it kills everything around it." She pulled up something on her phone. It was Veronica's Instagram. Hundreds of photos from the engagement party, each one carefully curated. In every caption, she mentioned overcoming obstacles, rising above negativity, protecting their love from toxic influences. The comments were full of support, praising her strength, condemning the unnamed monster who'd tried to destroy their happiness. But Helen had found something else. Veronica's LinkedIn showed she'd been at 3 different law firms in 5 years. Always leaving for better opportunities, according to her posts. Helen had done more digging. Each firm had sealed personnel records, but Helen's daughter worked in Chicago legal circles. Word was Veronica had a pattern: charm her way in, create chaos, leave before the consequences hit. "There's more," Helen said. She showed me a lawsuit settled out of court. Veronica's previous fiancé, a doctor named James Chin, had sued her for fraud after she'd transferred $200,000 from their joint accounts 2 weeks before their wedding. The case was sealed, but the initial filing was public record. He claimed she'd manipulated him into adding her to his accounts, then systematically drained them while planning a wedding that never happened. I stared at the screen, feeling something shift inside me. This wasn't about me. This was about Marcus. He wasn't her first victim, and he wouldn't be her last. But how could I prove it? How could I make him see what she really was when he'd already chosen her over me? That's when I remembered the prenup. Marcus had mentioned it casually a few weeks before the party, how Veronica insisted on one to protect both their assets. But if she was planning to marry him, why would she need protection? Unless she wasn't planning to stay married for long. The decision to fight back didn't come as some dramatic moment of revelation. It came while I was making a batch of honey lavender jam at 2 a.m, unable to sleep for the 5th night straight. I was stirring the pot, watching the mixture slowly thicken, when I realized something. Veronica thought she'd removed me from the equation. She thought I'd retreat in shame, disappear like she'd commanded. She didn't know about the 17 years I'd spent building a business from nothing after Daniel died. She didn't know about the connections I'd made, the network of restaurant owners, suppliers, and farmers who'd become like family. She didn't know that before I was a preserve maker, I'd been a paralegal at Daniel's law firm for 15 years. Most importantly, she didn't know that I still had access to Marcus's email. He'd given me his passwords years ago when he was in law school, in case of emergencies. He'd never changed them. I hadn't looked once since he graduated, respecting his privacy. But this was an emergency. I started small, just reading their exchanges. What I found made my stomach turn. Veronica's emails to Marcus were masterclasses in manipulation. Every message subtly undermined his confidence while appearing supportive. Your presentation was good, baby, but maybe next time let me review it first. Your mom called again, I know she means well, but these constant interruptions are affecting your work performance. But the real revelation came in her emails to someone named Derek in Chicago. Flirtatious messages, inside jokes, mentions of meeting up when she was in town for business. Nothing explicitly incriminating, but enough to show a pattern. Then I found the smoking gun, an email thread about the prenup. She was pushing for terms that would give her 50% of all assets acquired during the marriage, including any inheritance. She knew about Daniel's estate, the properties and investments that would eventually go to Marcus. She was setting him up. I printed everything. Old habits from my paralegal days kicked in: organize, document, create a timeline. But I needed more. I needed proof that would be undeniable, not just suspicious emails that Marcus could explain away. That's when Margaret surprised me. My sister, who'd initially told me to give Veronica time, showed up at my door with a bottle of wine and a flash drive. I've been doing some research, she said. Turns out my book club includes 3 women from Chicago. Veronica's name came up. The files on the drive were a goldmine. Screenshots from a deleted wedding website, Veronica and James, supposed to be married June 2019. Photos from social media showing her wearing an engagement ring that looked suspiciously like the one now on her finger, just reset in a different band. And most damning, a message from James's sister warning a mutual friend about Veronica's tactics. But I couldn't just dump this on Marcus. He'd see it as an attack, more evidence of his toxic mother trying to destroy his happiness. I needed Veronica to expose herself. I needed her to think she'd won completely, to get comfortable, to make a mistake. So I did something that went against every instinct. I wrote Marcus a letter. Not an email, a real letter on my personal stationery. I apologized for embarrassing them at the party. I said I understood that I needed to step back. I wished them happiness. And I included a check for $50,000 as an early wedding gift, saying I wanted to contribute since I wouldn't be involved in the planning. The trap was set. Veronica wouldn't be able to resist gloating about her victory. And when people think they've won, they get careless. My first mistake was underestimating how thoroughly Veronica had isolated Marcus. The letter I sent came back unopened, returned to sender, written in her handwriting. She was screening his mail. When I tried calling his office, his assistant informed me that Mr. Brewster had requested all calls from family be held. The assistant sounded uncomfortable, like she'd been forced to deliver this message multiple times. I tried reaching out through mutual friends. David Chin, who'd been Marcus's roommate in law school, promised to talk to him. 2 days later, David texted me that Marcus had asked him to choose sides, and he couldn't afford to lose the connection. Marcus was sending his firm significant business. Rebecca Martinez, whose daughter Marcus had tutored through high school, said Veronica had already gotten to her with stories of my supposed mental instability. The isolation was surgical and complete. Every path to Marcus was blocked by Veronica's carefully constructed narrative. I was the crazy mother who couldn't let go, the woman who'd made a scene at their engagement party, the toxic presence they'd had to cut off for their own well-being. Helen suggested we try a different approach. Her daughter knew someone at Veronica's firm. Maybe we could find allies there, people who'd seen through her facade. But when Helen made inquiries, she hit a wall. Veronica had recently been made partner, the youngest in the firm's history. She was untouchable, at least professionally. 3 weeks into my investigation, I had a setback that nearly broke me. Marcus had posted on Facebook, his first post in months. It was a photo of him and Veronica at a charity gala, him in a tuxedo I'd never seen, her in a stunning black gown. The caption read, "Surround yourself with people who elevate you, not those who try to hold you back." Grateful to have found my partner in every sense of the word. The comments were brutal. People I'd known for years were congratulating him on setting boundaries, on choosing happiness. My own cousin wrote, "Your dad would be proud of you for standing up for yourself." I sat in my workshop, staring at that post, feeling the anger turn cold and focused. Daniel would be proud? Daniel would be horrified to see his son being manipulated by a predator. That comment, that invocation of my dead husband to justify abandoning me, was the moment I stopped feeling guilty about what I was planning. I started documenting everything meticulously. Every interaction Veronica had with anyone in my network went into a file. I reached out to James Chin, her ex-fiancé, through a carefully worded email from a new address. He responded within hours. He couldn't speak publicly because of the settlement agreement, but he provided contact information for others who'd been hurt by Veronica. A pattern emerged. She targeted men with family money, isolated them, then either drained their accounts or positioned herself for a profitable divorce. But I needed proof that would stand up in court, something that would protect Marcus even if he hated me for it. That's when I remembered the preserved business. Veronica had dismissed it as a little jam hobby, but it gave me access to something powerful, Seattle's restaurant community. I started with Franco at Bella Vista. His restaurant had been buying my preserves for 10 years. When I mentioned Veronica's name, his expression darkened. She'd tried to get him to invest in a restaurant concept 2 years ago, before she met Marcus. She'd presented fraudulent financial projections, promised returns that were impossible. When Franco's lawyer had investigated, she'd disappeared. He still had the documents. Then came Antoinette Lejardin. Veronica had dated his nephew briefly, convinced him to co-sign a car lease, then disappeared when the payments came due. The nephew's credit was destroyed. He was still recovering financially. One by one, I built a network of people Veronica had burned. But how to use this information without seeming like the vengeful mother-in-law she'd painted me as? I needed her to expose herself, publicly, in a way that couldn't be denied or explained away. The solution came from an unexpected source, Veronica's own vanity. Helen had been monitoring her social media and noticed she'd been tagged in posts about the Seattle Women's Legal Society annual gala. She was being honored as Young Lawyer of the Year. The event was in 3 weeks, and she'd been posting constantly about it, humble bragging about the recognition, thanking mentors, positioning herself as a rising star. I knew about that gala. Daniel's firm had been a sponsor for 20 years. I still received invitations as his widow. More importantly, I knew the selection committee chair, Judge Patricia Hoffman. Patricia and I had served on the hospital board together for 5 years. She was also the judge who'd sealed James Chen's lawsuit against Veronica, though she couldn't discuss the case directly. I met Patricia for coffee at a small place in Wallingford, away from downtown where Veronica might have eyes. I didn't mention the personal situation. Instead, I expressed concern about the society's due diligence process for honorees. As someone who'd been in legal circles for decades, I suggested they might want to verify the backgrounds of anyone they were putting on a pedestal. Patricia was sharp. She knew I wasn't raising this issue randomly. She assured me the committee took vetting seriously and any credible concerns would be investigated. I left her with a folder, not of accusations, but of public records. Court filings, business registrations, a timeline of Veronica's employment history. Just facts, no interpretation. Meanwhile, I had another iron in the fire. The prenup Veronica was pushing required full financial disclosure from both parties. Through my restaurant connections, I learned she'd been frequenting an upscale wine bar in Belltown with Derek, her Chicago correspondent. The owner, Mikhail, owed me a favor. I'd helped his mother navigate Medicare paperwork when no one else would. Mikhail confirmed they met every Thursday when Derek was in town for business. They had a regular table, always paid cash, always left together. He couldn't do anything that would compromise his business, but he could ensure I happened to be having dinner there next Thursday. With a very specific guest. That guest was Diane Chin, James's sister. She'd flown in from San Francisco at her own expense when I explained the situation. Diane was elegant, sophisticated, and absolutely furious about what Veronica had done to her brother. She was also a corporate investigator, skilled at getting information without seeming to try. Thursday came. I sat at a corner table with Diane, perfectly positioned to be seen, but not to seem like we were watching. Veronica arrived at 8, Derek at 8:15. They were comfortable together, intimate in the way of people who'd known each other for years. Derek kept touching her hand, playing with her engagement ring, the ring that had once been promised to another man. Diane recorded nothing, that would be illegal. But she did something better. She walked past their table on her way to the bathroom, stopped, and gasped. Veronica? Veronica Ashford? Oh my God, I haven't seen you since James's wedding. Oh wait, that's right, there wasn't a wedding, was there? Veronica's face went white. Derek looked confused. Diane continued, voice just loud enough to carry. Is this Derek? James told me about him. Said you two were always so close. Then she looked at the ring, gasped again. Is that the same ring? Just reset? That's bold, girl. Really bold. She walked away before Veronica could respond. But the damage was done. Derek was asking questions. Other diners were staring. Veronica was scrambling to explain, her usually smooth voice high and panicked. But the real execution was yet to come. The Women's Legal Society had begun their investigation. They'd found discrepancies in Veronica's resume, claims of cases she'd won that she'd actually just assisted on, a nonprofit board position she'd claimed but never held. They'd also received anonymous tips about her behavior at previous firms, all true, all documented, all from sources they could verify. 2 weeks before the gala, I received a call from Patricia. The committee had decided to rescind Veronica's award. They would notify her tomorrow, citing inconsistencies in her application that did not meet the society's standards of integrity. The decision would be announced publicly, as was their standard practice for withdrawn honors. I felt no joy, just cold satisfaction. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about saving my son. The morning the Women's Legal Society announced their decision, Veronica's carefully constructed world began to crumble. The statement was diplomatically worded but devastating. After thorough review, the committee has determined that Ms. Ashford's application contained significant inaccuracies that do not align with our organization's values of truth and integrity in the legal profession. Within hours, the Seattle legal community was buzzing. The society never rescinded awards. Never. For them to do so publicly meant they'd found something serious. Veronica's firm issued a terse statement about conducting an internal review. Her Instagram went private. But the internet never forgets. Screenshots of her bragging posts about the award were already circulating with crying laughing emojis. That evening, Marcus called me for the first time in 2 months. His voice was confused, defensive. Mom, did you have something to do with this? I told him the truth. I'd suggest they verify backgrounds. Nothing more. If Veronica had been honest in her application, there would have been no problem. He hung up on me, but I'd heard something in his voice, the first crack of doubt. The next morning, Derek contacted Marcus. I know because Marcus called me again, this time angry. Derek had questions about seeing Veronica with another man's sister, about a ring, about a wedding that didn't happen. Veronica had apparently told Derek that Diane was a delusional ex-girlfriend of Marcus's who was stalking them. But Derek was a smart man. He'd done his own research, found the sealed lawsuit, found James Chen's LinkedIn, connected the dots. "What did you do?" Marcus demanded. I told him about the dinner, about Diane. "I didn't plan it," I said. "I was just having dinner with a friend whose brother had been engaged to Veronica. What happened after that was just truth meeting daylight." Marcus accused me of stalking Veronica, of orchestrating everything. But I could hear it in his voice, he was starting to question things. Why had Veronica lied to Derek? Why did she have James's sister blocked on all social media? Why were there sealed court records? The final blow came from an unexpected direction. Franco, my restaurant connection, happened to serve on the state bar's ethics committee. The society's findings had triggered an automatic review of Veronica's bar license. The review uncovered that she'd lied on her bar application about previous addresses. She'd hidden the 3 evictions from her record, the bounce checks, the credit card fraud investigation that had been dropped when she'd paid restitution. But the masterstroke was something I hadn't planned. Helen's daughter, the one in Chicago legal circles, had been doing her own investigation. She discovered that Veronica wasn't even in Ashford. She'd legally changed her name 5 years ago from Veronica Potts. The Ashford family crest, the stories about generations of lawyers, the old money background, all fabricated. Her real father was in prison for embezzlement. Her mother lived in a trailer park in Indiana. Helen's daughter sent this information to one person, Veronica's managing partner at the firm. The same partner who'd just staked his reputation on making her the youngest partner in firm history. The same partner who'd been telling clients about their prestigious new partner with the impeccable pedigree. The firm acted swiftly and quietly. Veronica was placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. But in legal circles, administrative leave meant one thing: she was done. The Seattle legal community was small, gossip traveled fast, and by the end of the week, everyone knew that Veronica Ashford, or whoever she really was finished in this city. Marcus showed up at my door on a Saturday morning, 3 weeks after the engagement party that had started all this. He looked exhausted, defeated. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there in the doorway like he used to as a child when he'd done something wrong and didn't know how to admit it. I didn't say "I told you so." I didn't say anything. I just opened the door wider and let him in. He sat at the kitchen table where he'd eaten thousands of meals, where his father had helped him with homework, where we'd celebrated and mourned and lived our lives before Veronica had tried to erase it all. "She's gone," he said finally. "Moved out yesterday. Took the ring. Took the cash from our joint account. Left a note saying I was too provincial for her anyway. I made him tea, the same chamomile blend I'd made when he was sick as a child." We sat in silence for a long time. Finally, he asked the question I'd been dreading. "How did you know? How did you see what I couldn't?" I told him about the patterns I'd recognized from my paralegal days, about the investigation, about James Chin and the others. But mostly, I told him about love, how real love builds you up, not tears you down. How it connects you to people, not isolates you from them. How his father had loved us both that way, and how I'd failed to protect him from someone who didn't understand that kind of love. "I'm sorry," he said, and started crying. "Mom, I'm so sorry. The things she said about you, the things I let her say. Dad would be ashamed of me." I held my 30-year-old son while he sobbed, the way I'd held him through skinned knees and broken hearts and the death of his father. Veronica had taken 2 years of our lives, had nearly destroyed our relationship, and had humiliated us both publicly. But she was gone, and we were still here. The scandal followed Veronica out of Seattle. Last I heard, she'd tried to establish herself in Portland, but the legal community there had been warned. Then Los Angeles, with the same result. The internet had made her con game impossible to sustain. Every potential employer who Googled her found the Women's Legal Society statement, the bar investigation, the rumors and whispers that followed her like smoke. Marcus threw himself into therapy. The therapist specialized in victims of emotional manipulation, and slowly, session by session, Marcus began to understand what had happened to him. He learned about love bombing, isolation tactics, gaslighting, all the tools Veronica had used to separate him from everyone who might have protected him. We didn't return to our old relationship immediately. There was too much damage, too much hurt on both sides. But we started with small things. Coffee on Tuesday mornings. A text when something reminded us of Daniel. He helped me at the farmer's market one Saturday, and though it was awkward at first, by the end of the day we'd found a rhythm, just like the old days. The preserved business, which had suffered during those dark months, slowly recovered. My customers had noticed my absence, the decline in quality when I'd been too distressed to maintain my standards. But food people are forgiving. They understand that sometimes life interrupts art. Orders picked up, and by December, I was back to full production. Helen remained my constant companion through it all. She never said she was proud of me for fighting back, but she didn't have to. The way she smiled when she heard about Veronica's latest failure to establish herself somewhere new said everything. The engagement party guests were another matter. Some reached out with awkward apologies, saying they'd been caught up in the moment, that they should have known I wasn't the person Veronica had described. Others maintained their distance, either out of embarrassment or because they still believed Veronica's version of events. I found I didn't care much either way. The people who mattered had stood by me, even if from a distance. Margaret, my sister, was the most surprising. After initially telling me to give Veronica time, she'd become my fiercest defender once the truth came out. She told anyone who would listen about how I'd saved Marcus, how I'd fought for him when he couldn't fight for himself. She even started a rumor that I'd hired a private investigator, making me sound far more badass than I actually was. Marcus found the photo album I'd made for the engagement party, the one documenting his life from birth to college. He spent an entire evening going through it, sometimes laughing, sometimes crying. He pointed to a picture of his high school graduation, where Daniel and I stood on either side of him, all of us grinning. "We look so happy," he said. We were complete. 6 months after Veronica left, Marcus started dating again, cautiously. He brought Rachel to Sunday dinner in March. She was a pediatric nurse, quiet and kind, with a laugh that came easily and eyes that looked directly at you when she spoke. When I served my grandmother's pot roast, she asked for the recipe. When she saw my workshop, she asked if I could teach her to make jam. She wasn't trying to impress anyone, she was just genuinely interested in our lives. But the biggest change was in me. I'd always thought of myself as a gentle person, someone who avoided conflict, who smoothed things over. Discovering I could be calculating, strategic, even ruthless when protecting my family had shifted something fundamental in my self-perception. I wasn't proud of what I'd done, but I wasn't ashamed either. Sometimes love requires you to fight dirty. The workshop became my sanctuary again, but it felt different now. Each batch of jam I made carried a kind of defiance, proof that Veronica hadn't broken me, that my little jam business was still here, still bringing sweetness into the world despite her attempts to make everything bitter. I even created a new flavor that winter, a dark cherry with black pepper and bourbon. Helen laughed when she tasted it, said it was perfectly balanced between sweet and dangerous, just like me. It's been a year now since that engagement party. The Fairmont Hotel still makes me nauseous when I drive past, but the feeling fades a little more each time. Marcus and Rachel are taking things slow, but she comes to Sunday dinners regularly now. Last week, she brought her mother, a retired teacher who spent the entire meal asking about my preserves techniques and sharing her own pickle recipes. No one mentioned Veronica. It's like she was a fevered dream we all woke up from. I received a letter last month, forwarded through my lawyer. It was from James Chin, Veronica's ex-fiancé. He thanked me for stopping her, for protecting Marcus from what he'd endured. He said he'd spent 3 years in therapy recovering from the financial and emotional devastation she'd caused. He wanted me to know that what I'd done wasn't just revenge, it was justice, and it had helped him find closure. Sometimes I wonder where Veronica is now. Not out of concern, but out of a dark curiosity. Is she running the same con on someone else? Has she created a new identity, a new backstory, a new family crest? Or has the internet age finally made her particular brand of manipulation impossible? I hope it's the latter, but I suspect predators like her always find new hunting grounds. Marcus asked me recently if I regretted anything about how I handled the situation. I thought about it for a long time. I regret that it took me so long to see her for what she was. I regret the pain Marcus went through, both during the relationship and after. But I don't regret fighting for him, even when he couldn't see he needed saving. Daniel was right, all those years ago in his office. Sometimes love means being willing to be seen as the villain if it protects someone you love. Veronica painted me as the toxic mother-in-law, the destroyer of their happiness. And maybe I was. But I'd rather be the villain in her story than a bystander in my son's destruction. The preserved business is thriving now. I added 3 new restaurants to my client list, and the farmer's market stall has a waiting list for special orders. Helen jokes that I should create a flavor called Revenge Preserves, best served cold. But revenge isn't what drives me anymore. It's the simple pleasure of creating something good, something real, in a world where people like Veronica exist. Last Sunday, Marcus helped me reorganize the workshop. As we labeled jars and cleaned equipment, he said something that made everything worth it. You know, Mom, I used to think Dad was the strong one in the family. But he always knew the truth, you were the fighter. You just only fought when it really mattered. We worked in comfortable silence after that, the kind of silence that exists between people who've been through hell together and came out the other side. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, catching the glass jars and throwing rainbow patterns on the walls. It was beautiful and simple and real, everything Veronica had never understood about our lives. Some people say revenge is bitter, that it leaves you empty. But sometimes, when someone tries to destroy your family, revenge is just another word for love. The fierce, protective kind that does whatever it takes to save the people who matter. I'm not proud of what I did to Veronica, but I'd do it again in a heartbeat. Because that's what mothers do. We protect our children, even from themselves, even when they hate us for it. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, they come back to us, scarred but whole, ready to start again. If you've made it this far in my story, you understand that sometimes the greatest gift isn't disappearing, it's refusing to. It's standing your ground, fighting back, and proving that some bonds can't be broken by manipulation or lies or public humiliation. They can only be strengthened, like metals forged in fire. Thank you for listening to my story. If you have someone in your life trying to isolate you from the people you love, pay attention to that red flag. And if you're watching from Seattle and you see me at the farmer's market, stop by. I'll give you a jar of that dark cherry bourbon jam. It's my reminder that sometimes the sweetest things come from the darkest moments. Hit subscribe if you want to hear more stories about people who fought back and won. Drop a comment with your city. I'm curious if toxic in-laws are the same everywhere. And remember, when someone tells you to disappear, sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to go.